What does good positioning look like?
Well, without trying to make this a not safe for work thing, but it's a bit like pornography. Like it's difficult to define, but you know it when you see it. And let me put a bit of color on this. There'll be 1,000 new websites being put up for SaaS businesses at the moment, and this doesn't tell the whole story because, if you're doing a sales process, there'll be pitch decks and that sort of stuff. But you can read a lot into a business and how well it's doing sales and marketing and that positioning piece from the content on their website. And it's kind of that snapshot of when you land on that homepage, can you answer these 3 or 4 questions? It's like, first of all, what the hell is it? I think some founders have maybe spent a little bit too much time listening to Simon Sinek. Love Simon Sinek, by the way. Start with Why, really great book. But people have really doubled down on this why, and they haven't really addressed the how or the what so much.
And we're back for another episode of the Startup Hustle. This is your host, Matt Watson. Very excited to be joined today by Dale Walden, who is the founder of Njord Co, who is a SaaS B2B marketing company. Today, we're going to be talking about positioning and a few other things. That's one of his expertises. I know it's something that all companies struggle with is how do we position, how do we focus on what it is that we really do and message and market to the right people. Before we get started, I do want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by Fullscale, which is my company. If you're looking to build a software development team, hire software developers. I have 300 developers in the Philippines. I work for dozens of other companies at 60, 70% less cost of traditionally hiring developers. You can check us out at fullscale.io. Dale, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Matt. Really excited to be here. I've been really enjoying listening to your episodes. So yeah, real pleasure and privilege to be chatting to you today.
Are we positioning the podcast the right way?
Yeah, I think you've got a really great range of customers, and I think that it's pretty self-explanatory what it's going to be about. I think you've got the word startup, so if people are into startups, and then the hustle, I think that speaks to the kind of energetic and sometimes frantic experience of being in topsy-turvy world that being in a startup can be like sometimes. So yeah, I think it's pretty strong.
Well, your career started that way, right? You were working for sofa.com originally, which seems bizarre to me that people would buy sofas online, but evidently they were really successful at it.
Yeah, so although I'm focused on consulting B2B software companies now, I actually started my career or my first career success in the B2C world. Sofa.com, there's a not safe for work story about how the founders acquired the URL from the US and brought it over to the UK. So if you've got 5 minutes to spare and to entertain yourself, go and look that up. But yeah, there was nothing particularly astounding about the sofas in the nicest way. They were sort of mid-price sofas, but I think what we cracked there was that commercial buying experience, because it's a real pain in the arse trying to buy furniture. It's a high-cost product. Like after your house, your car, it's probably, sofa or bed is probably the most expensive thing you're going to buy for your home. And yeah, we tried to make that stress-free and possibly even sometimes enjoyable experience with, say, for what the time was a really best-in-class e-commerce website. I mean, it's been surpassed by many, many since then.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we really focused on delighting that customer and making it a really great experience and taking all the stress and worry out of a big ticket purchase.
And so is that what gave you the itch to be an entrepreneur yourself?
Oh yeah, 100%. So yeah, big kudos to the 2 bosses I had there. So Pat and Rowan, and Pat no longer with us sadly, but Rowan's now in the world of lamps. So check out Pookie lamps if you're in the UK. And I hope I'm not breaking any confidence here, might be arriving to the US very soon. So look out for Pookie lamps. But yeah, they were great mentors for me and 100% gave me the startup bug. My first venture, I think I may as well get it over with, was not a roaring success, but I tried to take some of the principles of that buying experience and that brand from Soap.com and apply it to suits. So I was living in London at the time. A bunch of my friends were working in finance, so very classically wearing the blue and grey business suit every day. And I thought, hey, this is a market. How could I sort of make this a more enjoyable experience for a product that can be quite expensive? And so I got, we were called Wasted Blazer. I got some very nice and expensive photography done of a very handsome chap wearing a suit, and started, networking with my friends and their friends of friends, like building up a customer list, and measuring these suits and getting them custom made and then delivering them to the customer. The one flaw in the plan is I really sucked at measuring the suits. So the fabrics were fabulous. The linings looked luxurious. Everything was perfect. But I mean, apart from the fact they had 2 arms and 2 legs, they were not great fitting suits on and by and all. So apologies to anyone that bought a suit from me in that period. And I also reflected that I think like being a solopreneur maybe wasn't for me, and that actually that collaborative element of work was what I really enjoyed, and working with teams. And I think, business at its best is a real team sport. So, and I was getting a lot of that as I'd started contracting at eBay at that point, and I was learning a lot about being inside a big technology business. So that was kind of like, far more exciting at that point than being told, on a sort of fortnightly basis that I'd screwed up and got people's measurements wrong. And
So what led you to start your company today, Njord?
So more lately in my career, I worked at eBay. I've also worked agency side in a digital agency, doing digital transformation projects, and also worked at Stepstone, which is the 3rd largest job platform after LinkedIn and Indeed. And then found myself working in a series of SaaS or SaaS-like businesses after that. And I started to have this revelation about a year ago that it almost didn't matter which industry these businesses were in. So whether it was HR tech or ed tech or fintech or martech, they had a lot of the same challenges over and over again. So whether that was in terms of acquiring new customers or making themselves profitable, one of those two things, they were, in the nicest way, making some similar mistakes or had similar challenges to overcome and similar business and operational challenges to overcome. And I guess my hypothesis now is that actually the bigger half of a B2B SaaS business is not the technology, as much as you need fantastic technologies, and I believe they're available, Matt, at full scale if people
That's
go and
correct.
look you up.
Yeah, we can help that. Yeah.
So finding you definitely need good software engineers, good data engineers and data scientists, those sort of folks. But what I found was a lot of founders got great domain knowledge, could ship great products super really fast, but the problem was getting it to market and selling that at a price that was going to make the business profitable. And so we've set up Njord Co to try and solve that problem for startup and scale-up founders. And we're possibly even, watch this space, looking, sort of advising VCs about how they can either pick the best businesses to invest in or even coach some of their existing portfolio businesses to get better and better and scale faster.
Well, so for an early stage company, that's one of the struggles, right? Is how much do you invest in building the product versus how much do you spend in sales and marketing? And, for I guess day one, you've got to put nearly 100% into the product. But the problem is that dynamic has to change very quickly, right? When it's time to take the product to market. But most people probably wait too late to spend enough on sales and marketing.
Yeah, or thinking about, if we jump into like some of the things that people should think about, is they've figured out the tech, they've figured out this cool new thing it does, and with the influx of money in and founders in AI space and blockchain or crypto, right? These are very exciting new technology pieces. There's lots of people trying to jump in and solve problems and business problems in there, but thinking about who is my customer. So we talk about, so it was great listening to Charity Majors from Honeycomb. I was listening to her episode on the podcast this morning, and she was talking about ICP and talking about ideal customer profile for those uninitiated. The different personas that she was dealing with, like where do you focus? And my advice to people is you should niche down and focus your ICP until it becomes really uncomfortable. Or it should feel uncomfortable that you feel like you're ignoring these big segments of different personas or different industries or whatever it may be, different sizes of business, whatever it may be. Because I guess the wisdom I would share there is there's no niche that if you were the number one player globally, that you wouldn't make a 10 million or maybe even 100 million ARR business out of that niche. So maybe to put that into context, my mum's side of the family, they're farmers or have farming businesses. So my granddad, then my uncle, and then latterly my aunt running like agricultural contracting business. So they've got the tractors and machinery, but not the land. And so they contract to farmers. Well, their business is only as scalable to the distance you can drive a tractor back and forth in one day, right?
Yeah.
Whereas software, with some cultural barriers, some legal, political barriers, can be global, right? You're going to host it on your servers, and people are going to access it from anywhere in the world. So your niche can be super, super narrow, but if you're solving that problem better than anyone else, then the scalability is really exciting.
Well, so one of my previous companies, Stackify, we had this problem because we sold to all software developers, which means we sold to no software developers, right? Because the market was so big. And we had customers in 60 different countries, right? And it was very difficult for us to hone in on who our ICP was. And even at full scale today, it's like, okay, we provide software development talent to other companies, but a lot of companies need software development talent. Like, it's a huge market, right? So it becomes really difficult to some degree to figure out how to focus. Who do we sell to? So maybe you can help me today figure out where I need to focus. But it's a challenge.
100%. And I'm assuming, Matt, that you don't stay up awake 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm gonna make that rash assumption about your lifestyle. So yeah, almost those areas you niche in, they can be arbitrary. Like, we're gonna do this for, in your case, maybe for US market or North American market. Like, certainly, like, time zone, I think, makes a lot of sense in terms of like avoiding burnout for you and your team. If people have got to jump on calls at all hours of the day because you're spanning lots of different time zones, then I think that's really challenging for a business. But again, if you're looking at industries, those sort of pieces is almost arbitrary. So Roy Sutherland does this joke about, Roy Sutherland works at Ogilvy, very like well-known marketing and sort of a human psychology guru. So he says, imagine something along the lines of, if you walk past a coffee shop and it said free coffee today, you'd go, okay, that's interesting. Whereas if you said it's free coffee for guys called Matt Watson with brown hair, like wearing blue polos, suddenly you're like, wow, that's really about me. So like, doing that positioning, it's a little bit of a sort of Jedi mind trick, if that makes sense. Like, just by picking one identifiable attribute about your customer suddenly makes your pitch and your approach and proposition to them feel so much more relevant. And again here, that switch from that like tech to that more sort of humanities kind of world, those emotional things I think are really, really important.
Well, and examples of that for us at Full Scale, our biggest focus early on was actually geography. Right, like most of our customers are in Kansas City. It's in one major city, and that helped us because it's nearly impossible to talk to somebody and they don't know one of our existing customers. They probably actually know, our contact at many local other customers, right? So it helps a lot with getting referrals and the network of that. And sometimes just geography alone is a great niche. Back to your farming example, like, you might want to farm your customers in a very small area as well.
Oh, 100% right. And I guess Kansas City is like, it's not a New York or San Francisco, right? So it's maybe a little bit off the horizons of like some bigger players, right? And you've got the advantage. If you're there, you're going to bump into these people at Starbucks. You can run local meetups or whatever it may be. You can, take them out for lunch or invite them around for, weekend barbecue of technology leaders, whatever it may be. I don't know if you're doing any of these, Matt. Like, maybe I'm sharing all your trade secrets, but like, the other trick is like finding what's your unfair advantage, right? So if you're in Kansas, then, if you're in Kansas City, then let's use that to your own advantage. These may be overlooked markets and people that haven't got 100 cold emails from people this week is maybe a great place to start.
Our unfair advantage is Patrick Mahomes and Taylor Swift.
Got you.
That's our unfair advantage in Kansas City right now.
Just under connection. I've got a little bit of American football knowledge, but I think without the Taylor Swift nudge, I'd have been struggling.
So, we won the last 2 Super Bowls in the NFL. So how do you find what is good positioning? What does good positioning look like?
Well, without trying to make this a not safe for work thing, but it's a bit like pornography. Like, it's difficult to define, but you know it when you see it. And let me put a bit of color on this. There'll be 1,000 new websites being put up for SaaS businesses at the moment, and this doesn't tell the whole story because, if you're doing a sales process, there'll be pitch decks and that sort of stuff. But you can read a lot into a business and how well it's doing sales and marketing and that positioning piece from the content on their website. And it's kind of that snapshot of when you land on that homepage, can you answer these 3 or 4 questions? It's first of all, what the hell is it? I think some founders have maybe spent a little bit too much time listening to Simon Sinek. Love Simon Sinek, by the way. Start with Why, really great book. But people have really doubled down on this why, and they haven't really addressed the how or the what so much. So there's a website talking about world peace, and you're like, I thought this was accounting software, guys. Am I there? Do I know what this thing is? The second is, who is it for? And back to that, is it addressable and relevant to me? Is it accountancy software for lawyers, for argument's sake? So I'm a lawyer, I need accountancy software, great. And then the third bit, and this is very much leaning on April Dunford, who's, I think, very much the sort of guru for B2B positioning. I really recommend people check out another podcast that she does. And her book, obviously awesome, it talks about differentiated value. So people use differentiated value or unique selling point, USP, what's special about this accountancy software for lawyers? So is there a killer feature, and how does that make it better? So, you often see a lot of, we'll go back to that AI and, crypto or blockchain startups. They'll often talk about the technical features. There's kind of a so what, it's centralized or decentralized, or it's using this blockchain, or it's using this large language model. What's the benefit for me as a customer with this particular problems, trying to solve this particular use case? What's so great about your software? So they're the first 3, which I'd say, if you can't do those, you're really giving yourself an uphill challenge in terms of selling that software to a customer that should be a good fit for you. And then kind of the sort of gold star or A star standard here would be, can you imbibe some status onto the buyer or an emotional feeling of being a customer or user of this product? So I'm going to use a non-software example for this because I think it brings it to life. But DeWalt drills, they're they're power tools, but for professional contractors, and they're a premium product. So people pay more than your standard one that you'd maybe buy at your local homeware store, right? You go to their website today, they talk about these are tools for professionals who are tough and smart. And so if you're a contractor, those 2 attributes really resonate with those people. So they go, yeah, I'm tough and I'm smart and I use DeWalt drills. And so what are those maybe? And obviously these adjectives are going to be slightly different depending on your industry. But let's say lawyers, accountancy software as used by the most profitable or most trusted, highest billing, whatever it may be, something like that. So something that makes people think, either I am that or I really, really want to be that based upon buying this product or service.
Well, and I think that's a great example where you're trying to use the positioning to really focus on what your end customer wants to achieve, right? They want to be tough and smart, like you're saying. And so the positioning of your product is trying to help the end customer achieve that goal. But a lot of people probably struggle with that kind of psychology and figuring out how to do marketing that way.
Yeah, and particularly I think for tech co-founders where they're like, well, it's obvious, it's got this feature, so it's brilliant. And it's like, that's probably not, well, so it might not be obvious to your end user, but particularly if you're selling to enterprises, you end up with this often large group of people you've got to convince who will never use the product. But the classic example would be the CFO, right? At an enterprise, they get these business cases put to them. you've got to persuade them that they're going to part with 100,000, $250,000, maybe $1 million for this piece of software. You've got to make that positioning really resonate with them as well, if you're trying to sell into enterprises. So make it obvious, and this is in the A star plus 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 version, is like demonstrate and quantify that differentiated value. So this is increasing efficiency by 50%, or even better if you can put that in dollar, pound, or euro signs. It's like, companies that did this made 1% more sales. If you're selling to a £100 million business, $100 million a year business, you put 1% on their sales, that's $1 million. Would I pay you $100,000 to get $1 million? Yeah, all day. I'd pay you 200. So make that really, really obvious for CFOs and those other stakeholders that might be umming and ahhing about that decision.
Well, one of the other challenges we have as entrepreneurs, especially as inventors and software developers and more technical people, you talked earlier about figuring out what our unfair advantage is. A lot of times what we think our unfair advantage is, like, this uses blockchain and Web3 and that's our advantage, doesn't mean a single damn thing to our customers, right? It's got to be an unfair advantage that actually has meaningful benefit to the customer. But I think as software developers, we think about it in the wrong way.
Yeah, and I think this podcast, right, is a really great example that you're engaging with your audience in a different way. Like, I'm sure you know who your competitors are. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of outsourcing or technology solutions of one sort or another. But yeah, your entire advantage, Matt, is you're creating great content that's really engaging and people want to listen to it. And when I need that additional tech resource, you're going to be front of mind. So yeah, so it may not always be an obvious thing to do. I suspect not every technology outsourcing company is doing podcasts. Otherwise, there's a lot of them.
Yeah, there would be a lot of them. So one of the things we talked about before is at an early stage company, you've got to have a lot of control over everything to really ensure that everything is going to work well. But then the problem that most founders have, right, is at some point in time, they don't want to give up that control.
Yeah, 100%. And I want to qualify that a lot of my shtick, a lot of my advice, it feels like I'm sort of beating up on founders. So I maybe got a couple of comments on that. Is like, maybe you don't. I'm working on my radical candor, like delivering, honest truth and consultancy, but in an empathetic and, kind way.
I saw something funny on LinkedIn this week that was about people from the UK specifically. It's like, when they say this, they actually mean this. And it was like totally different, like typical, I guess, sayings that people in the UK. And I read that whole thing and I'm like, you know what? I think I talk like somebody from the UK.
If you're a non-British employee working with either a British manager or in a British company, I would be very worried if someone said to me they were surprised by something or that they were curious about it. Because those sound like quite benign words for people. But in British corporate context, that means you've screwed something up. And I'm kind of pissed about it.
Yeah. So tell us more about.
Back to the stuff for founders, right? So yeah, I think you're 100%. And we were talking before that in those early stages of that startup journey, you're having to will your business into existence, right? You're effectively going around telling people about a thing that does not yet exist and telling them that not only it's going to exist, but when it does exist, it's going to be brilliant. And that takes a certain degree of sort of resilience and strength, right, to keep at that. And the challenge is then switching up, like you say, as you scale, because I sort of joke that you've got to go from being this like real ruthless dictator mindset in those early days, because there's going to be 101 people going to tell you, hey Matt, that sounds like a stupid idea, I wouldn't bother. And so that sort of ruthless determination has got to be with you. But there comes a point, and I'm sure you've reached this, is that like you do need to be able to delegate and be more collaborative with senior members and other members of your team, because your time doesn't scale, right? There's, like we said before, there's only 24 hours in the day. If you don't want to burn out, you can't be awake and working for too many of them, right? And so I think it's a really tough transition, right? And I think this often happens when you get about that 1 million or 2 million. I don't know if this rings true for you, but like when you got to about your first 1 or 2 million of revenue, suddenly it felt like things were really, really tough because you were having to do that delegation and that collaborative approach. I sort of joked that it's a bit like going from being this ruthless dictator like Stalin and then being this like really friendly, kindly Democrat like Nelson Mandela, like overnight. And like, I'm sure history buffs will back me up, but I don't think Joseph Stalin led the Soviet Union to like a liberal, inclusive democracy. So yeah, that transition's super hard, right? And like both practically and emotionally to like do that behavior switch.
I know people today that have very successful businesses that do 10 million a year in revenue, and this is what's holding them back. Is they want to control everything. They will not hire the right people. They will not trust those people. And ultimately that is what is holding their entire company back at this moment.
Yeah, and it's also not great for your exit strategy, right? Assuming you want to retire at some point and buy the boat, the island, the nice house, all this sort of stuff. Like if your business doesn't function without you being in every single decision point, as an acquirer or an investor, that's a lot less appealing, right? So building those muscles and training those other folks in your team is really worthwhile. I mean, so I keep giving like history or pop culture references. I love The Last Dance, the Chicago Bulls, like Michael Jordan documentary, and I thought it's really telling. And I think this kind of matches with that founder mindset. It's like, so Phil Jackson, who's the coach of Chicago Bulls, goes to Michael Jordan and goes, Michael, you're the best player on the team. You're the best player in the league. You're possibly the best player that's ever played the game. And I'm sure people will love to comment on that. But we're not trying to make you 1% better. We're trying to make the other 4 guys that are on the court with you 10, 20% better. I know that if you turn up and play, you're going to be the best player on the court. But the way we win championships is by building the skills and the teamwork of the other players on the team. And let's say, I think SaaS businesses, particularly, they're a team sport. And I think the best teams are the ones that collaborate and work well together.
I mean, it's always about talent, right? It's 100% about talent and having the best people on the team. And I'll be the first to admit, I'm not necessarily the best at that either, right? You have to stop and rethink about what you're doing to say, instead of me focusing on trying to get this thing done today, I need to spend time with somebody else and help build them up so they can be better at their job. It's always like a short-term versus long-term thinking, right? And in the short term, we're just trying to get things done. But long-term, it'd be better if we would focus our attention on building up the people around us.
Oh, no, 100%. And I think the other thing to be mindful is if you're bootstrapped, or even if you do have investment for seed or maybe Series A investment, like your resources are finite, right? So
there is no long-term.
Be able to have like, super senior or A-star players like in every single position, right? And so how do you get more out of the sum of its parts, right? How do you make your team great in the sum of its parts? And that's through that collaboration and getting people to achieve more as a team than they would as individuals.
Well, I think these are a lot of common problems that companies have as they grow. Positioning is another really big one, which we've talked a lot about today. I'm curious if you have any other suggestions about positioning or maybe case studies from customers that you've worked with and maybe problems they've had and how you help them correct them. Or
yeah, maybe sort of switch gears into kind of like pricing. I'll give you like I think I'll probably repeat myself about being really focused on niche. But I guess that I think we talked a little bit about industry earlier, and it sort of touched a little about selling to enterprises. I think the most important decision you can make about positioning early on is the size of the organization you're trying to sell to in a B2B context. So just to put this into examples, are you selling to SMBs, so small businesses of maybe a handful, 10 people? Or are you trying to sell to 100 or 1,000 people organizations, so commonly known as enterprise, right? So making that SMB versus enterprise piece. And then based upon that informs, regardless of the industry segment you're going to niche down or geography that we talked about earlier, that dictates a lot of the decisions you're going to make about pricing. So if it's SMBs, you probably want to be under that $10,000 mark. price point. There's a lot of research that shows once you get over $10,000, people don't want to put a credit card in. They want to speak to a human. They want to go through a sales process, all that sort of stuff. So the great news about that, if you're doing like small ticket size, is that you're going to get loads of scale, hopefully low or no touch sales, right? People are just going to use the tool, and typically the buyer, the guy or girl with a credit card in their hand is going to be the end user, so they can validate whether the product's right for them, whether it integrates with their other tools well or not, and so they can make the decision, whether it's there and then or after a 10 or 30-day trial, right? Is the classic way of doing it. So that's one approach. And for that area, you need so people talk about PLG or product-led growth. So there's great content out there. I think Wes Bush is probably like the most famous person there talking about that area, but there's lots of other people as well. So how do you make that product really intuitive, make it really obvious and self-serve? So that's one set of approaches. The other is if you're going to enterprise, and this is the difference between, being an athlete in the Olympics. The way you train for the 100 meters, which is that sort of SMB market, is very different to the way you're going to train for this, for a distance event like the 10,000, say. Just think about the shapes of the athletes, size and shape of the athletes that run those events. They look really, really different. Whereas enterprise, you're investing in account executives, so people that can tell a great story, great in networking, building those relationships over months, possibly even years, right? So those sales cycles can take a really long time. We talked about that stakeholder group of people that you've got to persuade. So you've not just got to persuade the end users or the head of department that really wants this tool. You've got to persuade a whole bunch of people in that organization that it's compliant with their data security, or that it actually does what it's going to what you say it's going to do in terms of return from the CFO or CEO's perspective. So they're very two different disciplines, and if you can make that distinction early on, I think that's probably the biggest decider about whether you're going to be successful as a business or not. Because if you dilute yourself by trying to do kind of everything, like you say, if you're for everyone, you're kind of for no one at the same time.
Well, so following up on that, as we kind of round out the show today, I'm curious, what would you say are the top, say, 3 mistakes that people make when it comes to positioning?
I think one is trying to go too broad. We talked about that before, right? They say, we are this tool. My growing pet hate is also saying that we're the all-in-one solution for something. I think way better to be awesome at one thing for one type of customer, and just back to our niche conversation, right? Just double, triple, quadruple down on that area. I think they're probably the biggest two I can come up. Nothing else springs to mind right now.
All right. Well, I really appreciate having you on the show today. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about your company and how you could help people?
Yep, so we'll mention them again. So Njord Co. So you can visit us at www.njord, so that's NJORD consult.com. Like I say, we're looking for startups between $500,000 of ARR up to about 2 or 3 million is probably our ICP, is where we think we add the most value. We can help companies before that, or bigger ones as well, but we think that middle range is where a lot of the pain and risk is, and where we can alleviate that and add the most value. And as we've talked about positioning, we specialize in 3 things. So it's positioning, pricing, and go-to-market, and helping, say, tech companies figure that out and get to their customers more quickly and become profitable and grow faster.
Awesome. Well, again, this was Dale Walden. Thank you so much for being on the show today. If you're listening and you're not subscribed to our newsletter, definitely go to startuphustlenews.com and check out the newsletter. If you're looking to hire software developers, check us out at fullscale.io. And thank you so much for listening today. Thanks, Dale.
Thanks, Matt. Pleasure to be here.